This is the God in heaven truth. America, any policy that murders, any policies that kill, any policies that cause death is anti the way of God. And racism kills. It kills dreams and it kills bodies. Poverty kills. Denial of health care kills. And if it murders, if it destroys, it's not of God. So what does the 4th of July mean to those of us seeking justice? It means refusing to accept the reality of racism and poverty, violence, as having the last word. That's what it means. It must mean public outcry and moral protest against injustice. That's what it must mean. It must mean there is unfinished business. It must mean that we don't accept the revisionist history like Trump spoke on the land of the Lakota and the Sioux Nation. It means we refuse to engage in the vain glory of American exceptionalism and know what we really need is American repentance. It means for those who love truth and love justice, July 4th is a time we ought to say, don't give me just flag waving alone. Let's fix the problems that still wave in the face of everyday people. It means don't sing anthems alone. That's not enough. We need the sound answers for addressing poverty. It means we don't say, just give us America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and then refuse to have grace on undocumented workers and the LGBT community. It means don't just pledge allegiance so much to a flag, but pledge allegiance to uplifting humanity. Pledge allegiance to giving essential workers what they need in the COVID pandemic. Pledge allegiance to making sure that every policy we pass helps to ensure that we are one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. What does it mean?
This country has not done right by people of ebony hue. This country claiming that it loves God, claiming on its money in God we trust, and yet in her values violates the principles and values of a God who says, if you are going to say that you love me, you show me that you love me by how you treat my children, especially those who are oppressed and poor.
The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference have called on faith leaders to reflect on Douglass's message to the nation then, and what should be our message to the nation now.
In 1852, 168 years ago, Frederick Douglass delivered his epic speech, "To a slave, what is the 4th of July?"
Jesus, Jeremiah, and Douglass warned those in authority and with power, do not administer laws that punish the poor.
I want to say thank you to the Poor People's Campaign and to the Proctor Conference, which gave me the honor of joining 168 other faith leaders around the country who are reflecting on this speech today.
On July 5th, 1852, Frederick Douglass stood in front of a gathering of the Rochester's Ladies Anti-Slavery Society in Rochester, New York.
On this date, exactly 168 years ago, Frederick Douglass delivered a keynote address in Rochester, New York, at an Independence Day celebration.
Rabbis and imams, Christian clergy, as well as Unitarian across the country, and who are part of the Poor People's Campaign as well, who are really saying in one clear voice, we do yet have time to change. It is yet possible.
And I hear that in Douglass's words too, that it's possible that we can give birth to something new right now.
A truthful pronouncement for such a time as now, 168 years later, evidenced by the revolting barbarity and inhumane murder of George Floyd by the police before our very eyes, and seeing the tyrannical and maniacal tweets from the Oval Office affirming the call for white power.
The statement raised by the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass, there was a right side and a wrong side in the late war.
There are divergent views, and one viewpoint attempts to safeguard the false narratives that surround greed and white supremacy, nativism, ruthless and destructive capitalism, militarism, and the other narrative stakes out positions that are opposite of the other.
Frederick Douglass, my sisters and brothers, he deals with the elephant of hypocrisy, racism, oppression in the room of the American experiment.
America was born with the sin of racism, into the sin of racism, which was learned from its country of origin, Great Britain.
When he made his way to Ireland, there were crowds of 10 and 15,000 who wanted to hear him speak. The Irish saw a connection between Douglass and their work for freedom in relationship to the British Empire.
The promises of the American Revolution and the American dream, which were never including and inclusive of people of color, have disappeared from most Americans today.
Increasingly, an awakening is happening in folks who have been ever so sweetly kissed by the sun, who descend from African shores and are housed in black and brown bodies in this country, do not feel like independence was ever intended for us.
Over the last couple of weeks, you have seen that young people and the older people alike take to the streets, trying to discover and find where is this rumored land of the free and home of the brave.
While this was a time of celebration for some, I remind us that it was not a time of celebration for all. In the words of Margaret Atwood, for we were the people who were not in the papers. We lived in the spaces at the edges of the print. We lived in the gaps between the stories.
Let's remember the people today whose voices we have heard and often have not heard.
Brown people are always having to prove how American we are, and you will see, and often in immigrant households, a blatant kind of presentation of flags to show people how American we are, because that seems to be the only way some people will be able to say that you are American.
But Jesus says that his followers are to walk the walk, talk the talk, unlike the religious leaders and authorities of his day.
Now, Black people, you know there is a difference between someone telling you, I'm on the way, and I'm outside. You know what it's like to be waiting for someone who said they're down the street and they have not even left the house. Do not lie to us about your place in the process, because we're about to be late for dinner.
Our present moment has blown the lid off the injustice, the suffering, and rage that so many of our neighbors continue to experience.
There is no country that can rival America when it comes to its treatment of Black and brown persons, its maltreatment of the poor, its arrogant exceptionalism which allows police officers to murder Black citizens with impunity on television, on camera, with no fear of reprisal or rebuke. There is no nation on the face of the earth that is more violent than the United States of America.
When will we say, to hell with it all, and cease to neglect the more important divine communal requirements of justice, mercy, and faithfulness?
While slavery as it was in Frederick Douglass's time has ended, the sin of racism that upheld slavery has not ended. And now that same racism upholds the systems of today.
When we talk about social justice, and when we talk about social justice in Islam, we have to recognize, we have to know the actual conditions of the people in this country.
We are in the midst of 3 pandemics that are unearthing hidden realities and blatant injustices. The pandemic of racism, of poverty, and the coronavirus pandemic.
Even hardened law and order advocates found that their stomachs turned as they watched that police officer squeeze the life out of that man. I didn't believe it, one of my friends said, when you all would talk about police brutality, but I see now that you were telling the truth.
The war on the poor is for profit. As a matter of course, every day they prey upon the vulnerable, the poor, the widow, the immigrant, the orphan.
And let's be clear about who is most harmed. It's the ones who can least afford it. Poor people and Black people and non-Black people of color have worse outcomes with this COVID-19 pandemic, because systemic racism and poverty mean that folk can't get the health care they need in the best of times. And this is hardly the best of times.
And his answer then is the same answer it is now. He said, it simply means that this whole holiday is a sham.
The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the declaration that, quote, all men are created equal, of course, never meant to include the rest of us.
Today, in 2020, your Black brothers and sisters in this country are saying the very same thing.
An Independence Day that has never actually happened, because there is not true independence, there is not true freedom, there is not true equity for all citizens of this country.
In declaring their independence, wish to stand upright. So the following blessing we say in reassuring ourselves that we too want to stand up straight. But also, and I would say even more important, not only allow for others to stand up straight, but to make sure.
The darker brothers and sisters, we, all of us, allies and accomplices, must make America just, democratic, fair, and make it work for all of us for the very first time.
Go directly to the palace. Don't just have a religious service. No, don't just celebrate the founding of the country. No, don't just have parades and military fanfare. No, to just taking care of the wealthy. Jeremiah is instructed by God to go to the king with thunder and power and say to the leadership, these are God's orders. Can I read it again in the Message Bible? Go to the royal palace, deliver this message. Say, listen to what God says, O king. If you want to be right with God, attend to matters of justice. Set things right between the people. Rescue the victims from their exploiters and the poor from their exploiters. Stop taking advantage of the immigrants and the children and the widows, and stop murdering with your power. As long as these things are true, then Frederick Douglass's words must still be our own. It is not the light that is needed, but fire.
For it is not the light that is needed, but the fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm. We need the whirlwind, and we need the earthquake.
The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
God is calling us, you all, us, those who are watching us, to create a world where justice reigns supreme.